I want to finish before, I've got one thing to show you at the end, but just before that I want to spend a few minutes focusing in on the Bussell family, because I said earlier I wanted to talk a bit about the personal baggage. And I think the Bussell family in particular are very interesting. There are experiences that those young people had, and I'm thinking about the brothers and sisters particularly, rather than Mrs. Bussell, John Garrett Bussell, Alfred, Charles, and Vernon and Lennox and their sisters, that I think help us to understand why they were so intent on portraying themselves as gentlemen and ladies, why it was so very important to them to show that they were cultured, why they wrote so much about it, why they behaved in the ways that they did. The first source that I want to show you is the clergy database. This is accessible online, and you can just find it if you search for clergydatabase.com or something like that. And this is the database for William Marchant Bussell, the father of our Bussell family here. He was a vicar, and he died when he was in his early 40s, leaving Mrs. Bussell with 9 children. We know that story. You can see down at the bottom here, you can see his employment record. If you want to, you can open up where any of the plus signs are, and you can find out where he went to university, how long he was there, who sponsored him. But the bit that I'm interested in is the bit at the bottom, and you can see that he was curate at a little village called Broadhampton before he went to Portsea, where he met later Mrs. Bussell, Frances Louisa Senior, and then he went to Portsmouth, and then he went to Portsea St Mary. Now, I've always read that William Marchant Bussell was the perpetual curate of Portsea when Frances Louisa married him, and that was the father that the children knew. When I investigated and looked in more detail at his record, you can see, if you look here, 1799, his new job, this is a year and a half before he married Mrs. Bussell, here, he was licensed as a lecturer or assistant clergyman to the curate of Portsmouth Church. He was commissioned to the vicar of St Nicholas on the Isle of Wight and the chaplain of Portsmouth Dockyard to administer oaths. And that was his job until in 1813 he became curate at Portsea, that's a misspelling, with a salary of £80 a year and the house in which he resided. That was the vicarage. William Marchant Bussell, I discovered, didn't become curate of Portsea until 10 years after he married Frances Louisa Yates. They'd had 7 of their children by the time he became the curate at Portsea. And that just became evident because I rummaged in the clergy database there. He certainly was doing the kind of jobs that a curate would do, because we know he baptised Charles Dickens in 1812. He was almost certainly living in the vicarage, but it wasn't his home, and he wasn't on that £80 a year salary. They must have been as poor as church mice for the first 10 years of their marriage. If you've read the book, you'll also know that I found, through looking in magazines and journals that are published online, I found that 2 of the Bussell sisters were in an adult orphanage institution in London, being schooled there, at the same time as Georgiana Malloy was in a very posh school in Kensington. I discovered the other day that so were the others. They were just in a different orphanage. I found this in a journal online, open access to anybody on the internet. Elizabeth Capel Bussell. This date on the left-hand side, by the way, January 1828, that's the date by which they have to leave the school, because the boys are sent out to be apprentices and the girls are sent out to be governesses or to get some kind of work. So they're allowed to stay there, or she was allowed to stay there until 1828. So Elizabeth Capel Bussell is Bessie Bussell, and, And also Lennox Bussell was in the orphanage institution. And just to go into a little bit more depth of what these young people were experiencing in the years when Georgiana Malloy was learning to be a lady in Kensington, Georgiana, their next door neighbour, who would have asked them when they arrived that year and stayed with her for the first few weeks, I hear you went to school in London. So did I. Whoops. There's the school. This is the orphanage institution. 2 schools for orphans of poor clergymen at St John's Wood. The girls' school was on the left, the boys' school was on the right. They weren't allowed to have visitors. I've read the curriculum as well in the same document online. They weren't allowed to receive gifts. They went to church twice on Sundays. They were given 1 new uniform once a year. And this is the name of the school. These are the regulations. And this is what Bessie, Mary, and the other sister whose name's left. This is what they were doing. They were learning to sew neatly, sewing household linens for the rich ladies of London. It says, all kinds of plain needlework are taken in at the school and performed by the children at the following rates. So, 3 shillings for a full trimmed shirt, 1 and 6 for a servant's shirt, 2 shillings for a fine napkin. Other work of every sort at proportionable rates. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribers to this charity, the rich folks, having linen to make, are particularly requested to send it to this school to be made as well for the employment and improvement of the children. This is a family who existed on charity in certainly for the last 10 years or so of their lives before they came here. Mrs. Bussell, have you ever wondered why she lived in Winchester? It was in the diocese that her husband had worked for as the curate of Portsea. She was in Winchester because she was living in a charity house, a rather lovely place to live, right outside Winchester Cathedral, but it was a sort of almshouse for the poor widows of the clergy. So it was a charity place. And she also managed to get John Garrett Bussell and one of his brothers a place at Winchester School, also on the charity, which we already know. But that's why Mrs. Bussell was living in Winchester, because she was in a charity house. I found Charles, who was so very conscious of his stammer that he found it very difficult to interact in social situations. I don't know very much about stammering, but I know a little bit from friends who've had a stammer and had to deal with it, that there are often reasons for that to happen. And Charles, this is his articles of clerkship. He signed up to become a clerk or a solicitor. He actually signed up for, I think it was 5 years from December 1826. So Charles would obviously have had to have broken that clerkship in order to come to Australia. But probably the kind of job that would have left him in a fairly quiet place that he would have felt comfortable with.